Hello, and welcome to a Workout Wednesday walkthrough. I'm Curtis Harris, and this is week 49. And this week we are looking at the parallel coordinates chart. And this is a chart type that I've never built in Tableau. So this was an interesting challenge for me to complete because I needed to actually Google things and figure things out that I didn't previously know how to do. So this was fun. With that being said, this took a while to figure out, and I didn't feel like posting a video of me thinking and Googling was necessarily worth it. So we're going to try something a little bit different this week where I can just walk you through the steps I took to complete this challenge. So we have a Tableau workbook up with different tabs that will show us piece by piece how this chart is formed, how the data is normalized to form a chart like this, and we can walk through how we got there. So with that being said, let's open up our Tableau workbook and see how we did. Okay, so now we're in Tableau and we're looking at the data that supports this chart. And I want to highlight the main antagonist, if you will, in this challenge. It seems like every week there's this one big hurdle that you need to get past, this one enemy that's blocking you from getting to the final solution. And this one was pretty obvious right off the bat. So the parallel coordinates chart is a line chart that goes from dimension to dimension, measure name to measure name. So this is the setup, but as you can see, if I were to build a line chart out of this data, we're not going to get anything that's useful. So I'll put measure values on rows, subcategory on our level of detail, and do a line chart. And you can see the problem right away. The sales values are significantly, exponentially higher than profit ratio in customers. So we can't just plop a line chart into Tableau and call it good. We have to normalize these values together so they can all make sense on the same plane. If I go back, we'll just highlight what I mean by that. 167,000 is not on the same playing field as 25%, nor is it on the same playing field as 474. Even if we just had profit ratio in customers, we would have the exact same issue because the percentage is just so much lower than a real number, a whole number. So let's go back, and we have to think about this. We have to figure out how to make these values kind of jive together and plot on the same field. And how we would do that in my head was figure out how to make them all numbers that range from 0 to 100%. Just for the plot. We can still put in the actual numbers into the tooltip. We can still put in the actual numbers to the labels. We don't have to display our normalized values to our users. They don't need to know that we did some trickery behind the scenes to get things to work. But we have to do them to actually produce the chart that we're being asked to produce. So let's figure out how we do that. We'll navigate over to this data validation tab that I built, and we're going to focus in on sales. The methodology will be the same for profit ratio and for customers. But this is highlighting exactly how we do the normalization. So if you look at this view, you see subcategory on rows, and then our actual measure value, sales, is our first column there. And what I wanted to do, I had to go Google this, but I wanted to break it out into smaller chunks so it made more sense, is write a calculation that finds the max sales, the min, and then take the difference between those two. Adam, get out of here. So we're going max sales, $330,000. You see that in the top left corner here, and we repeat that down our column here. Min sales, $3,024. You see that in the bottom left column. Sell here, and we'll repeat that across the board. And then what we want to do is just find our range, the min or the max minus the min, and this is what we end up with, 326,983. So we built all of those out using table calculations per the challenge's instructions, and it's a pretty simple table calc. It's just a window max sum of sales. Anne said we cannot use level of detail calculations, but if you were, you simply could have just taken the max at the data source level. So something like that would do just the same. since we're not working with any filters here, it's just subcategory and that's it. We don't need to worry about order of operations. This is just saying find the max. Actually, this wouldn't work. We could have said by subcategory, find the sum of sales. And this would do the same thing. So for every subcategory, find the sum of sales and then take the max of that, which would be fine. So this is actually a little more confusing than the table calc is, where the table calculations just look at the window. If you're not familiar with the term window in Tableau, it just means the view that you're looking at right now, and find the max value of the measure that you gave it in the calc. So window min, sum of sales, same thing, to find the min. The range is simply those two calculations together, max minus min. And then the last step is just the normalized value. And I'm still not 100% sure why this works out. I'm not the greatest at remembering my math classes from high school, but the calculation reads, take the sum of sales. So if we look at the phones row, take the sum of sales, 330,000, minus the min sales, 3,024, which gives us some number. So 300,000 minus 324 is actually just the range in this scenario, and divide it by the range. So this evaluates to 326,983, and then we're dividing it by 326,983, which puts it right at the top, 100%. The same thing would happen at the bottom. So we take sales minus the min, which is 0, and we're dividing it by the range. And if you're dividing 0 into anything, the answer is always 0. So we have a scale that goes from 0 to 100, and we can repeat this for all of the other two measures. So you'll see similar things going on here in profit and customers. I put them in folders so it's just a little easier to consume. Normalized profit ratio is the same thing. Take the profit ratio minus the min profit ratio. You can see over here I'm using a table calc, window min profit ratio to find that, and I'm dividing it by the range of profit ratio. So same setup. If you figured out one, you figured out all of them. So really easy to do once you knew kind of what to look for. And I'll admit that did take me quite a while to figure out the exact calculation to use to find that normalized value. I did have to search on that. So hopefully you found it a little sooner than I did. So our setup's fine. We can move on. So if we go to our data validation 2, one of the parts of the challenge was to actually look at each of those normalized values and find which one was the highest for each subcategory. That's how this is colored here, the final output. The ones, if you look at all 3 points for storage, the customer data point is the highest. So our challenge was to look at all 3 of the measure values for each subcategory and find which one is the highest. And this is a little difficult, right? Because clearly, as we saw when I started, sales is going to be the highest actual number value. So we had to go in and use our normalized values to figure out which one is the highest. As we know, the calculations we built go from 0 to 100%. And we can just go in there and say, for each thing, find out which one of those normalized values is the highest. So let's look into this color category field that I built and see how I accomplish that. I'm sure there's multiple ways to do this, but this is what I did. So for me, I just went in and compared all of those different things and all of the different combinations of those. So the first one, I wanted to look at the high sales customers or high sales subcategories. So if I said normalized sales is greater than the profit ratio and it's also greater than the customers, then I know that that is the highest of the 3 numbers. So I label that high sales. And then going down is so on and so forth. We're just inputting all of the different combinations it could be. So for the high profit customer or subcategories, we look at profit ratio being higher than normalized sales and normalized profit profit ratio being higher than normalized customers. And that gives us our high profit ratio subcategories. And the same thing for high customer count. So that was pretty easy to figure out. If you thought about what you did first to get the normalized values, this should have been a pretty simple calculation to go in and tackle. If you tried to use the actual number of values, sales, profit ratio, and count of customers, you might have ran into a little more difficulty because those numbers just aren't comparable. So that worked out pretty well. And just a note, as we're working on this, everything in your table calculation should be set to compute by the subcategory field. It's just pretty easy. Instead of doing table down or anything else, just locking in the subcategory and it'll evaluate appropriately going forward. So that was the coloring. So now we have our normalized values, we have our color field all figured out. We can actually start to build out the parallel coordinates chart. And it's pretty easy. So as we saw at the start of this video, we're just showing measure values on rows, measure names to split them up, and we're making an align chart. And you can see by plotting our normalized values, we get that same comparison across the board. They go from 0 to 100. That's fine. And all we have to do at this point to make it seem like it's not as weird as it is put the actual values on our level of detail and put them in the tooltip. So I can say phones is right here. The sales are 330. The profit ratio is 13, and the customers are 511. The whole point of this is to see where these subcategories are thriving and maybe where they're lagging behind. It's not really to worry about the actual numbers, the lines themselves. The actual numbers are surfaced in the tooltips. So that's our parallel coordinates chart. You could probably move on at this point and call it a day, but Anne wanted us to build some bars that go right through the measure name. So that was our challenge part 2 to this. And all I did here was duplicate measure values onto another axis. And instead of having our subcategory on the level of detail, on the detail shelf, I'll put it on the path shelf. And that creates that straight line split that we're looking for. It's just going to connect subcategories rather than connecting measure names. So we're telling Tableau how to draw the line. We're using subcategory as the path for that line. So it takes the bottom one, which we know is at 0. Our normalized value down there is at 0. And we'll draw it all the way up to 100%. And we'll do that for every subcategory or for every measure name. So that makes our lines pretty simple. And at this point, all we need to do is just dual axis this thing, synchronize it up, and we have our shape. If I move over, we can see that taking shape. So we have our dual axis linked up. We have our pipes between the lines. We have dots here without using another axis. So if we go to our measure values, we go to color, you just need to do this little indicator here. On the markers, there's this one with the little dots, and that will create these dots for us instead of wasting a dual axis on dots themselves or a circle mark. So we did that here. Another tricky part to this challenge, which I think a lot of people were running into, are the labels. And these are not reference lines, they're actual labels. And I'm still not fully sure how this is working, how it is. 100%, I'm 95% sure, but just not quite there. So I had to build 3 different calculations for labels. And let's just look at one of them. So we go to our customer label, and we knew that the bottom of the line is 0, and we know that the top of the line is 1. So we can just single out those values and null out everything else. So our normalized customers there's multiple marks, right? There's one value for every subcategory, but we just want to find the top and the bottom ones, the ones that are at 1 and 0, and label those and null everything else out so a label cannot appear. So that's what we did here. I said if the value is 1, the normalized value, then display the customer count. And if it's 0, then display the customer count. And I could have said else null, which is the same exact calculation, but in an if statement, if you omit the else at the end, everything that fails just turns null anyway. So I usually just save the typing and just go with this. We hit OK. We put our measure name on the label shelf, and we put the 3 label calculations on the label shelf as well. And if you have a knowledge of how Tableau deals with nulls and actual values, this will make a little more sense. So in the actual label dialog box, we can put measure names on top, which matches the challenge, and we can put these right next to each other. And what this does, what this forces Tableau to do is only display the one that makes sense. So if I put these on separate lines, we're going to start to see odd behavior. So if I do that, hit apply, things are going to go all over the place, and we don't want that. So we want Tableau to say, find the one that's not null, display that, and then this seems to work for each measure name, as you can see. We hit OK. And the one thing that I wasn't sure about was this field dialog box. I was just playing around because I had this set to automatic, and I was seeing weird behavior like this, and I couldn't quite figure out. I said label the min and max, which would be the top and the bottom of each line, which I thought was right, and it was still displaying way more marks than I thought it would for labels. So the only thing I could really think to touch was this guy here. And I don't even know what this means. I don't think I've ever noticed this card and have no idea why it does what it does. But after clicking through all of them and landing on measure values, it gave me the exact behavior I was looking for. So if anyone wants to explain that to me later, that's great, because I still don't know why this works, but it does. Okay, and then from here, this is pretty much done, right? We have our tooltips. We injected that color calculation into our tooltips, so bookcases has high sales. We've used the appropriate coloring, Vidris or Viridis, Vidris color palette, which is very nice. And we're at the finish line. And if we move on one tab here, you can see this in my workbook. It's just formatting, right? We need to take off all of the axis labels. We need to take off the grid lines, the zero lines, et cetera, et cetera. So that's done. And the only part of the challenge left was the custom color legend. And I'll show you how I did this one. So basically, we are just putting our color category calculated field on our text shelf. We're assigning it to color like we did for the line chart, and we are throwing subcategory on there as well, because this field needs subcategory to actually do anything. If I take that off, it's going to just blow up. So we have subcategory there, and what I didn't want to happen is have all of these labels here. So if I took off that filter that I'll show you in a second, we'll get 1 mark for every subcategory and their color category designation. So what I did was build this calculation called first, and again use the normalized value to just limit it down. So I wanted one of each of these color categories, and the way I did that was just find the 3 times where the normalized value was 1. So customers, profit ratio, and sales, find the one that's 1 and throw out everything else. So this or that equals 1. This is a Boolean calculation. We put that on our filters, set it to true. Again, compute using subcategory, and that leaves us with 3 marks instead of 17 down here in the bottom left corner. So that was that. That was pretty easy. No big deal there. We're using the same field, so the highlight action is going to be very simple on our dashboard. As usual with me, I'm floating a vertical container, adding some inner padding because we should always be using our padding, and just layering these on top of each other. And to clean it up, The last step was just the highlight action. We're going from the legend sheet to the parallel coordinates chart using the color category field, which is the same one on both sheets. The only thing that I'm failing, and I just don't know how to do it, and I really don't think it's that big of a deal, is in Anne's example, the labels for the subcategory were showing at all of the points of the line. So on the left, in the middle, and on the right. I think that is it's a pretty good feature. I don't know. It could go either way, right? It's nice to see paper here and paper there when I'm looking at the chart itself. But I just couldn't get it to work. I don't know why. I told it to label highlighted marks. So if I go back to my parallel coordinates chart, look at this label shelf, I said label the subcategory for highlighted marks, which is the entire line. So I am really, I don't know. I don't know how this isn't working, but I'm just going to leave it. Time to move on at some point. But it gets the basis of it. So the only challenge that we kind of missed here is the subcategory labels, but the bigger challenge, the harder challenge, the antagonist of this challenge, like I said, was the normalized values. That was really the key to everything. If you nailed the normalized values, you could pretty much get everything else to work after that. So hopefully you didn't have too hard of a time doing that. Hopefully you Googled the right words to figure out a solution. And if you're still stuck, hopefully this video helps you get unstuck and see how I solved it. So that's it for today. It's a shorter video. Let me know what you think about this style, or I could go back to struggling through the workout the first time I look at it, if that is more helpful. With that, signing off. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.